Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to a very special episode of PAXP Voice. I'm your host, Victor, as always joined with me, Roman, and in this episode, we bring you a very special guest by the name of Anton Borkel, a creative lead at Riot Games, which is obviously very well known for League of Legends, and as well as having strongly contributed to the Dead Island reveal trailer that was to some very controversial, but to others very acclaimed. So, thank you for joining us, Anton.
To be perfectly honest and open, you are our very first guest that we've ever had.
Oh, I'm honored.
As you should be.
You have to, you have to start at the bottom. You have to.
Oh my God! No. We have a few people lined up, and we actually wanted to start with you because we thought who better to start with than somebody who has a backing of such a popular video game, right? Because you guys are huge.
It is, one or two people play it. That's true.
Yeah, one or two people play it. That's very modest. And I was hoping, so just to kind of, I guess to start this, like we start, anything else in life, right?
Roman, are you recording now? Because I think we should probably just start recording just in case.
I am. I'm absolutely recording.
Oh, perfect.
This is gonna be in the chat right here. Thank you for the interruption. But
there's no edits. There's no edits.
None.
So remember when I told you that this wasn't live? I lied. This is 100% live, and there are millions of people listening right now. But I was hoping to start off kind of with your childhood, right? Back when you were like a little kid, and were you born in Germany?
Yes, born and raised in Hamburg, Germany.
Okay. Well, he didn't get that accent over here.
Yeah, I can't hide it. I think the first apartment I was trying to get in LA, I just said, "Oh, this looks nice," and she's like, "Oh, you're from Germany." And it's like instantly, apparently, like it gives away the accent. There's no way of hiding it.
Yeah.
So as a kid, and I don't know how old you are. I'm guessing maybe like late 20s, early 30s.
Yes,
right.
That's spot on. Yeah.
So as a kid, did you guys have access to a lot of video games in Germany?
I guess I'm not that old. So when I was growing up, my earliest memories of playing around with the PC was with like 386, 486, like these old computers that had like a turbo button that you had to press to play certain games. Mm-hmm. And I remember my father having to start a lot of games for me because it was the MS-DOS system, and I couldn't type, and then couldn't type English especially. To even start the programs was like a big hurdle. Those are kind of like the earliest memories. But then I think the games industry, there wasn't really an industry there, but there were a couple of retail stores where you could actually purchase games. It was certainly not like mainstream or anything. There was actually much more growing up like Game Boys and those kind of like first handheld consoles, I guess.
Before like actual physical like standalone consoles that would come to the TV, they were just handhelds.
Yeah, I mean, technically those things would have been available. I know a friend of mine was like a huge Commodore 64 fan. Uh-huh. But my family, I'm one of 5 kids. So if you give one kid a Game Boy, you would have needed to give like all 5 kids a Game Boy. So my parents were always like, that's not really an option. And then later, I think we kind of got my father in his office. We kind of started to get their old PCs essentially. That they were kind of like upgrading some of the hardware in the company, and then we would basically get like the old server with like I don't know, like an old like MS-DOS or something like that, something that is like very rudimentary, not really made for kids, but we kind of made it work. And I don't remember at what age exactly. Must have been in like in like 94 or 95 or something, we had the first kind of like home computer, and that's when it like really kicked off. And I basically had to take turns with my brother and like who could play on the PC or do stuff with it essentially.
What were you playing back then?
The first kind of games I don't even remember the names for. There's like old kind of like two-color games where you just basically had to input numbers, and then an ape would throw bananas at houses and like weird shit like that. I remember.
Donkey Kong.
So very
it
style
wasn't even
games.
that. It's like yeah, it's much more rudimentary. It's more like E.T. and those kind of like games, I guess. And then at a friend's house, I remember playing like a Ninja Turtles game on like the Commodore 64, and that stuff just blowing my mind. And I think at a friend's house, I'm not even sure, because Germany's censorship was or still one of the tougher ones, but I think I actually played like early versions of like Wolfenstein, the very original, without as a kid, like I didn't have any reference for what was on display or the historic meaning of that game. But yeah, those were kind of like the very first kind of like childhood memories I associate with games, and then just being completely fascinated with the graphics that were on display.
So did your education, your pursuit in the education of what you do now as a profession, did that come from a young age when you were experiencing these games at that age? I
think it really took off for me when I was more like 14, 15. I think me and my brother, we got heavily invested into, we both played the World of Warcraft beta. That was one of the things where we were like, wow, like why isn't everybody like witnessing this right now? This is insane. We were both also like in the earlier days of Half-Life, and even before Counter-Strike became like the retail game, we played like in beta 0.5, 0.61, like those really, really great years of Counter-Strike and there's other like Half-Life mods. And around the time I was going to a lot of like LAN parties with friends and connecting via these old kind of like round cinch cables, not like the cut ones that they have these days, but the round ones where you had to have like a T device to connect like multiple PCs together, and you had to install like drivers for your network card, and it almost took like 6 to 8 hours just to get the LAN party rolling essentially. But I remember we played a lot of like Counter-Strike, and then the first kind of like Battlefield 1942 came out, and I was just so blown away by
that was amazing.
It was insane, and like we were just like 8 to 10 kids or something, and having the time of our life, not sleeping for 72 hours and just drinking Coca-Cola.
You're kidding me.
Eating chips and that kind of stuff. Yeah. So I think the first point where I noticed this is more than just fun was actually a game called Alien vs. Predator.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that was really good back on PC, right? Like way back in the day.
Yes,
that's right. That was a classic.
It was insane, and you could. The great thing about it, you could play a Marine, obviously, but then you could also play an alien. And it's funny because now it's kind of sometimes touted as one of those great features, like asymmetric multiplayer. Back in those days, Alien vs. Predator, I played the Predator, and then 4 of my friends played Marines, and we kind of played it in a very cinematic way without knowing what that meant. Kind of, the 4 Marines they just had to enter the ship, and like a real military squad, like searching and that kind of stuff. And there was this great feature. The game had a taunt function, so as a Marine you would shout. And as an alien, you would have this iconic, alien sound. And as a Predator, it had this, basically from the movie, like this war cry. And we didn't have enough space at my friend's house where we were. So it was me and then another guy sitting upstairs, and then, the rest of the guys were downstairs. And I would basically always sneak up on the group, like trying to make their way into this spaceship, and I would press the decloak button behind them, press the taunt button, and then I would basically execute somebody and impale somebody's head on a stick. And I heard them screaming from there because they were so, everybody was playing with headset, and they were legitimately scared, but also so excited, like watching an amazing horror movie or something like that. And in that moment, I basically knew setting up these moments for, even as a kid, was actually more special to me than basically, ranking up frags or something. I was still, I really enjoyed Unreal Tournament, and I really enjoy playing Quake and lots of other great competitive games. But that was the moment where I basically felt like this actually there's even storytelling potential essentially in multiplayer games, kind of like, setting up a scene and setting up an emotion that you want to evoke in the audience, even though, those were my friends. And the emotion was being scared, essentially. That was still like a very, a powerful experience for me. And after that, I basically tried to research modifying game engines, getting into scripting in Unreal Tournament, in the Unreal Engine, and basically then started recording myself over and over with like different characters, and then combining those scripts into one text file that would basically break my computer, but it essentially enabled me to film sequences with like 50 actors in one scene that were all essentially being played by me and my poor Pentium, who was trying to handle all that mess.
I saw some.
So then it seems like you knew your place in terms of what you were going to do as a profession when you were getting older, then when you'd be an adult, I guess.
Yeah, and that would probably say too much. I think even until my early 20s, that might have something to do with Germany. It wasn't really a hot spot for games. Now there are roles like narrative designer, cinematic designer, and even more like entry level positions at publishers and game developers. Back then, there was like no connection to bringing cinematic languages or editing techniques or something that necessarily had nothing to do with games directly. You had to be a programmer, you had to be an engineer, you had to be a level designer, and I basically peeked into that kind of stuff. Anybody who's over in, I think it's called the Hammer editor or something, during those early Half-Life days, and it's just like, okay, this is like reading 7 foreign languages at once, and for me that wasn't really an option. So basically, when I was growing up and trying to modify game engines and that kind of stuff, my parents looked at me as like, stop playing on the computer all the time. You need to go out, you need to socialize. I was telling them, hey, I'm connecting with all these people over ICQ, and in this IRC channel, I found this guy in London who's like really into machinima and that kind of stuff. But obviously they couldn't really, they didn't understand what I was talking about, and they basically just saw it as gaming.
Well, at that time, it was such a new concept. They couldn't even fathom the industry that it would grow into.
Absolutely. For me, there was also, I couldn't really articulate that this is actually something I'm interested in a profession, because that didn't exist for me as a concept, basically.
Right.
One of the things you mentioned was censorship, right? And I know that Germany is very sensitive to Nazis, right? How? You said Wolfenstein.
Rightfully so.
Right. Wolfenstein, right? Were the Nazis there? Were they replaced with something else? Were they dehumanized into like aliens or anything, or was it just a strict like same game that we got here?
I mean, actually, just very recently, I played through the excellent game Wolfenstein 2. I think the new Colossus, or what's it called?
Oh, yeah.
And actually, I'm not quite sure, but I think the only thing that they had to replace is the swastika in Germany. That's basically a forbidden symbol. You're not necessarily, other than in like museums and in very specific contexts, you cannot necessarily portray it in media in general. So basically, id Software and those guys had to remove and basically replace the textures in those days. There are also other instances in Half-Life, for example, was deemed too violent in Germany, and they actually had to replace the Marines with robots, and then they switched the blood from red to green and all that kind of stuff. I think recently those things have been diminished as basically the countries are kind of like moving closer together in terms of having rated M for mature means mature, right, and you can basically trust that audience into hopefully digesting the content that is being presented to them. Yeah, but back in those days, I think they also then had to switch out certain personalities in the game or something. And even I think I recently saw a documentary about that, and it must have been for like there's not like millions of consumers at the time in Germany, so they basically reprogrammed that for what I would assume would be a couple of thousands of copies, which is insane. Yeah.
Because I think even right now, like to this day, the only monument from like back in the Nazi era is I think the only one still stands is the Stauffenberg, right? The guy from that the movie Valkyrie is based on, Operation Valkyrie, with the Tom Cruise. Yeah, I think that's the only one.
I think it's interesting to me living in the US and basically witnessing, certain political and social issues that Germany also had to go through, and one is the during the recent demonstrations that they were basically demonstrating not getting rid of a certain statue and that kind of stuff. Basically, Germany went through all that kind of stuff many moons ago, I guess. So it's
kind of like parallel issues, but just a different time, essentially.
Yeah, and I guess also the situation is certainly a different one. Back then, Germany was under foreign control, and then afterwards, they basically wanted to present themselves to the world as kind of like a more uplifting, positive, free, peaceful kind of society. And one of the things that resulted out of that was that, let's get rid of all of this crap, essentially. And I think now with more time being passed, I think there's also now a counter argument of like, well, it's kind of also like a good reminder of like, this thing actually happened. So a couple of streams in Germany are basically trying to figure out a way how can we basically preserve history without necessarily celebrating it, and that's obviously like a very, very tough balancing act. And I don't want to be in charge to having to figure that stuff out. But yeah, usually I'm pretty proud in terms of how at least currently as a society they are managing that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. How old were you when you left Germany?
I left Germany, I think, in 2011. So I was 25 or something.
Oh, so not too long ago. Not too long ago at all.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There was it was never really in the cards for me, and essentially I had I had a couple of gigs as an editor and kind of like freelance, concepts here and there, but essentially my first full-time job in the games industry was also in Germany. After that, I basically got kind of like headhunted and basically moved to LA. And I almost said I never looked back, but that's not true. I actually went back to Hamburg, Germany for a while, and now I've been back here since 2015.
Okay. So, with like you mentioned, you worked a little bit in Germany. You didn't happen to work with Crytek, did you?
That's actually a very, very funny story. One of the basically I was studying film and trying to, at the time I basically for like 5 or 6 years I basically had like a portfolio of like amateurish, hey, I made this fan trailer for Halo or something,
which I've seen, and they were really good. I saw the Mass Effect one too. That was like some of the stuff that I saw on your website I thought was better than what I saw as actual previews that came out with the games officially.
it's funny because on the one hand, it's hard for me to look at it now, but actually back, I don't know, when I did the website like 4 or 5 years ago, I basically looked at that old stuff and I can still see so much of myself in there, like the creative signature and, the tonality and the mood that I like to present to people, that I kind of felt like, well, this is kind of me, even if the shit is like 15 years old or 10 years old at this point. I know
you do like I noticed that you have an emotional side to your like you want to draw out emotion. It's not just about violence for the sake of violence. It's not just explosions for the sake of explosions. There's always an emotional backstory in pretty much every preview I've seen you do.
That's very that makes me blush a little bit, but yeah, that's because for me, even if you look at it from a purely, hey, I'm running a company, I'm just looking at numbers or something, I think it's much easier to get your message out once you actually get people to listen. And I think you can only do that by presenting them something unique, something different. If you don't have the huge budgets, you basically need to make people care first, and then you can try and sell them something. And then you maybe want to, have all the explosions and all the crazy set pieces and that kind of stuff. But for all of that kind of stuff, I need to care first about the character that you're showing me. I need to care first about the world that you're showing me. And now in hindsight, that's kind of like easy for me to assess and to analyze. But at the time, I was basically just doing that because it felt right. I didn't necessarily have like a specific strategy, or I didn't set down as like, okay, I have like these very specific goals with this piece. It just that happened to me, my style of working. And only over the years, I basically look back at my work as like, okay, why did I actually like this? Like what actually for most of the stuff that I work on, I can rewatch it 10 years later and still feel like, there's still, I would make a lot of those choices again, basically, maybe hopefully with like better technical execution. But other than that, there's still so much of the same spirit in me now as there was back then, essentially.
It's funny going back to what you said about caring about that emotion or what it is you're working on. And I immediately thought of the Dead Island.
Oh my God, I was gonna mention that
trailer. I mean, I remember when I first saw that when it was announced, and granted, there's no end credits to that trailer, so I had no idea that you were a part of it. And when I went through your portfolio of work and that was mentioned, I was just like, oh my God, I couldn't believe this, because it was such an emotional capture of what you just said, emotions, drawing and caring about what it is. So, I mean, do you feel that is kind of, well, first, I mean, what was your part in that Dead Island trailer?
I was working on the client side, so I was working for the publisher of Dead Island at the time, and there was the first real big job I had in the industry, and I was basically the video guy in in a publishing house of like 100, let's say 100 people or something. I was the only guy doing anything with like moving images. So I was cutting in-game trailers and cutting concepts and that kind of stuff, and even like internal hype reels to get management excited for their own products and that kind of stuff. As a one-man band, so I did concepting, in-game camera direction.
So you're pitching. So you're basically pitching the sequence of events to your client, of how it's structured in a sense.
Yeah, it's more like I was directly working for the publisher, and if you're a publisher but the developer sits somewhere else, you're basically looking at, okay, cool, what is this game about, or what is the potential of this game, what might be angles that we want to present this game in. And it's very, very hard if you're deciding on budgets and you're the CEO of a company, you're sitting miles and miles away, not only from your own employees, but especially from the actual developer who's sitting on a different continent or something like that. So the first couple of videos that I produced was actually basically going into pre-alpha game builds and doing the same thing what I did, all those years earlier in kind of like Machinima, like manipulating game engines, trying to find cool and interesting ways to present content. And I was basically building up, the narrative and from inside the game engine and looking at sound files and trying to, and then, okay, here we cut to black and then this voice line plays and, all those kind of like tricks that you basically can use in trailers, but that you cannot really use in gameplay. So they basically looked at, this is pretty cool. Can you do, in-game trailers and that kind of stuff? So I cut together trailers for like racing games and music games and role-playing games. And one of those games was Dead Island. And at the time, the publisher, wasn't like one of the massive publishers, and they were in Germany. But Dead Island was, the biggest game, the biggest investment that they had ever made. But it was also a long forgotten game. It was in development, I think, around like 5 to 7 years or something. At that point, they took it over from a different company, I think, and they were like looking to basically announce it or like revitalize it essentially, and that's why they were going for a CG trailer. And at the time they had a couple of concepts floating around, and I only heard from it on the side because that was decided on like a higher level essentially, with the head of international marketing and my boss at the time and that kind of stuff. So it's like, hey, this cool creative kid here from Germany is really talented. Let him take a peek at the concept. And I looked at that, and it was essentially like, it was essentially going for shock value, with a guy coming into his hotel room and basically seeing his wife, cracking open the skull of their daughter or something at the bedpost or something. So I basically read that as like, okay, cool. If we do this, we're gonna have like people with pitchforks at the office the next day. Yeah. Like that's absolutely not only not in Germany. I think like worldwide, that's not how you announce a compelling product essentially. Right. And you have to remember, like this was my first job, but I basically said like, okay, this is the worst thing that I ever read, and let me come up with an alternative. And I basically, not really knowing how to do it at the time, but I was basically asking, hey, give me a briefing. I was basically asking, what are you trying to accomplish with this piece? And they were saying like, well, we basically have nothing. We don't have that much money. The budget for the CG trailer was fairly low, but it was the largest investment that they had ever done. So I basically said like, okay, cool. I personally don't like the horror genre that much. I'm sick and tired of the same old, zombie games. Mm-hmm. How about we try something else? And then they were saying, well, it still has to be super violent, because that's what the game is going to be. It's like, okay, cool. How about I find like, a creative solve to make the violence is in there, but it may be more aesthetically pleasing and that kind of stuff. And that's how I basically came up with a couple of concepts, and one of them is the usually the most referenced one, which is the basically having the meeting narrative arcs. And yeah, I felt at the time that was just like a very elegant way to get kind of like the best out of, all the things that, marketing wanted me to check, while still having something that felt super, super unique and also something that I personally wanted to watch, something that as a huge gamer, something that, I'd never really seen before like that. And it kind of ended up being, now I can laugh about it, but essentially, I had a champion in the office who really, really liked me. I said, like, okay, this kid got talent. I'm going to give him a shot. Mm-hmm. And he basically took the concept, and I basically started to chat with the production company and all that kind of stuff, and sending them references for music that I wanted, and basically like re-edited the stuff myself because they weren't getting it, and all the usual shenanigans. And then eventually it said like, so we wanted to check in how it's going with Dead Island, and then my friend basically I had to talk to the CEO and basically say like, yeah, well, actually, the thing that we discussed 3 months ago, we're actually not doing that anymore. And he had to talk to you. What we're doing instead.
Oh, must have been awkward.
And so I had to go up to the 5th floor into the CEO's office and basically draw on a whiteboard, like, the narrative arcs combining and all that kind of stuff. And there was a huge uproar in terms of like, who do you think you are? Like, this is our largest investment ever. Like, this is crazy. And, gamers, might not understand. This is not the type of content that they're used to. And all that kind of stuff. But I got essentially lucky because it was basically too late to, really like scratch
it. Him in the corner.
So, they basically said like, okay, cool. We can still like not release it or something. And my direct report actually like apologized to the CEO for me and that kind of stuff. Is like, wow, this will never happen again and that kind of stuff. And then I did, for the next week or so, I basically then re-edited versions myself, like of the previous and all that kind of stuff, until I felt like this is exactly the pacing I wanted. It was still somewhat away from from the final product that everybody got to see, but the music was in there, the pacing was in there, the story arcs were in there, the aesthetics were in there. Mm-hmm. And then I made like little choices, like in one of the earlier versions, then the production company came back and was like, okay, we now integrated your idea of kind of like the memory, kind of like when they take the picture and that kind of stuff, and they put it in the beginning of the movie. And I looked at it and it's like, how, like, no, it has to go into the end. Like, that's when it, when it hits the gut the most, kind of like, that's the where you really hammer home the tone and that kind of stuff. And I think that was the version where we went back to the CEO with, and also then at that point, like other, more senior people in the marketing office saw that and was like, okay, this actually feels kind of interesting and kind of feels special. If it was still previous, so if the visuals get there, this could be really cool. And then I think we sent somebody, our PR office in the US, actually negotiated an exclusive with IGN. And that was insane for us at the time because IGN, might have been even more popular than they are these days. And for, like a mid-sized German publisher, that was a huge deal. So I had to send them a preview to them. And I, artistic as I was, like, no, nobody gets to see like a work in progress version. They made me export a video, and I basically then exported like a 640 by 360 watermarked preview version of the video. And I think the reason it went viral at the very beginning was, I think it was Greg Miller or somebody, like one of the editors over there, going to their own forums and saying like, guys, we just received like a preview CG trailer, and it's the craziest, coolest thing we've ever seen. And please guess, for which game it is. And there were, I think, around, I don't know, like 40 or 50 pages full of comments with people guessing, and nobody guessed that island. So it was those were the odds we were up against. And then I think the full version went live the next day, and I think like Simon Pegg retweeted it, and then Ice-T retweeted it, and then we were basically then it was done. Like we didn't do any like pay media, we didn't do any kind of like traditional PR that other companies would do. It was basically just like a very organic lightning in a bottle situation.
Right. Why don't you think they capitalized on that? I guess that intensity that followed after it was previewed.
I mean,
do you think there was just too much shock value in it that they just wanted the people to kind of simmer over it?
Oh, what do you mean that the actual game didn't succeed that much?
No, the trailer itself, in terms of when you said that there was nothing really after the reveal of it.
I'm not quite sure I understand your question.
Okay, we'll move on. Yeah,
I don't actually, to be honest, I don't get it either. But so here's one thing I wanted to say. As far as that Dead Island trailer, that was the trailer that made me want to buy that game. And I bet you so many other people did too.
Yeah,
do you feel like
that once or twice? Yeah.
At that point, did you feel like, oh my God, here I am, I made it. Like I am the king of the world of trailers.
No,
really?
Because it's. I think success on the internet is a very surreal thing, I think if you're like a YouTube influencer, if you're like a stream personality or someone, people would associate your brand and your success directly with your personality and with with you as a human being. For me, I was basically the next. It basically, because it was a US release and we were in Germany, it essentially went live. So one of my brand managers at the time, he actually stayed awake the whole night and basically pressed F5 because he was like, we're just right now we are breaking the internet and nobody is witnessing it. And he was sitting in his apartment and basically pressing F5. And I was talking to him on the phone, and I was too scared to go to the computer and reading the comments and all that kind of stuff. So the next day, I basically, rode the subway to work like every day, and I looked at my phone, and it was just exploding, with people from work being like, "This is the craziest thing ever," and like high-fiving each other. And I looked around in the subway, and it was just Germany, very much like frowning faces everywhere, and like "don't talk to me" kind of like vibe, like there's every day. So it is a very surreal thing, because on the one hand, you're being told you basically just broke the internet and took like a huge step in your career, but it's not like you're having like a rock concert or anything like that. So it's very surreal, for sure. I think it really sunk in when I was living in Munich at the time, when I heard that my father was starting to Google my name on a daily basis. like this weird kind of like, I want to know what my, what success my son is up to, like a weird metric like that essentially told me that that's like a pretty big deal.
Interesting. So now you're at Riot, right? This is skipping obviously some time forward. And as I was reading over Riot, and to be fair, I played a little bit of League of Legends. I loved the art style, and I actually really liked the intro too, like the little, like the loading, not the loading screen, but I guess the login screen, right, with the little movement and like very kind of anime-ish looking. It's very beautiful. It wasn't really the kind of game that I really got into too much, and I think it's mainly because like I'm not much of a competitive gamer. Like I'll play maybe Halo once in a while, maybe Battlefield, but overall like I like to stick to single player games just because I'm not that good. Like I'm not super young anymore. So.
I hear you.
So, but one of the things that I saw in Riot that kind of got me thinking was their mission statement was to make gamers care, and I was hoping you could kind of talk a little bit about what that means, and specifically how you fit into that, or how you feel you fit into that.
For every presentation that we have internally, or for every kind of like deck that I send to vendors, there's always like this first slide of like the number one goal at Riot, which is we want to be the most player focused company in the world. And I think recently other companies also tried to adopt that kind of language, but Riot was basically already founded with that principle in mind, and actually never really shifted away from that. And I also have to freely admit, I didn't necessarily care for MOBAs when I went back from LA to
sure
Germany.
You can say that now?
I hope I'm safe. Yeah. So there's because I was more into shooters and console games and that kind of stuff. And to be fair, I also wasn't that much of a competitive gamer anymore around that time. So I was under the impression, well, this game is stupid. I don't want to go back to LA. But sure, I'll take a call. Like I'm always flattered if people reach out to me. So it's like I'm going to talk about the games industry any day, and if it's with an interesting company, even better. So I basically started talking in like January or something of 2015 when they reached out to me, and they're like, hey, we're Riot, we're like in Santa Monica, LA. We're working on this little game called League of Legends. Like, yeah, I think I heard about it, but this is not really in my orbit. I was more into console games around the time, but they sounded kind of sincere and interesting, and specifically for a company that is working, operating out of Los Angeles, it just sounded very different. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna check it out. It can't hurt. So I started playing League of Legends. Was terrible at it. I had the most frustrating time. It's like this is not working. Like this game, there's something wrong. And
it's the game's fault, right? It's always the game's fault.
Exactly. Like this, this doesn't work like a console game. I just cannot pick up and play. I'm constantly being punished for being impatient and all that kind of stuff. But over over the course of a couple of weeks of like playing the game and continue talking to them, I really, really realized that it was actually me. About the game, not knowing enough about the audience, and also not really understanding the appeal of a game like that. If you have a retail game, that you announce with like a big announcement CG trailer or something, that is something I could comprehend at the time. But something that's more ongoing, that is like super super complex, demands. It's basically more like a hobby than it is, here's just a little piece of entertainment that I consume for 30 minutes and then I'm going to move on. It's much closer to like a sport like tennis or something. Sometimes you have like a bad time playing tennis if you're playing against a better opponent. And then I basically over the course of a couple of weeks and months, it slowly started to dawn on me. And then I also looked into the esports scene more, and there was also like a thing that I basically in the early 2000s I kind of saw coming, and then also saw going away again in the Counter-Strike scene, and like all the Intel challenges and all that kind of stuff at the time. And then I realized, no, this is definitely here to stay, and this is actually like a really, really different approach on talking to players, taking their feelings and feedback into account in a different way, and also delivering a different kind of product, something that feels much more alive and not necessarily, hey, we're this huge company, and sometimes from our ivory towers we basically drop like a product down on the peasants, and then hopefully you're happy with it for like 3 years or something. So I think it was I think they talked to me for like 9 months or something. Basically over the course of that time, it was much more like a very interesting, like educational experience for me, and coming off successful projects, and then also working again in Germany. It was really, really like a feeling of I kind of know how this works. I'm probably one of the more successful or experienced guys around here, and there's nothing really that challenged me around at the time. It's often described as kind of like there's no worse feeling than kind of having a slight suspicion that you're the smartest guy in the room, because it kind of makes you feel really I don't know, like entitled, and you will become lazy, and you're not really doing your best work and that kind of stuff. And talking to some really, really inspiring and very smart people from Riot, realized okay, if I want to continue to grow, if I want to actually learn from other people, I basically I have to take the risk and basically go back to LA.
What do you do right now? What specifically, like, if I was going to ask you, like, what's your day-to-day like?
It's actually not that easy to explain, because it's one of the more like free-flowing definitions of a role. Riot in general doesn't really have, for most departments, not traditionally creative directors. It's a much flatter hierarchy in general, so you can become, the owner of a certain type of product, or of a certain, type of asset or something, if you're really passionate for it and if you have the skill set for it. But it's not necessarily that automatically this one person always does this. It's a much more like free-flowing operations. But at the time they realized, okay, to bring out, these more tougher, difficult CG assets that require like more preparation, more timeline, more focus, more due diligence in terms of the creative direction, and then also how does it influence a campaign. And that's basically what they offered me. Is like, hey, we kind of need wringable necks to be centered in that process, essentially coming up with a concept. Or leading ideation around campaigns for new champions, champion updates, skins, other type of personalization content. So my day-to-day is basically either leading exploration, production, or creative direction of marquee assets. That can mean, I mean, for me, that usually means CG assets, but we also do, a ton of like MoGraph stuff. We do comics, we do music videos, we do short stories, we do websites. So yeah, basically kind of working a little bit like a very free-flowing in-house marketing agency. And then based on my experience, working with external production companies and CG vendors, basically bringing in that experience, bringing in workflows and a relationship with directors that I like to work with, and how to work with producers, and recognizing trends in the industry and all kinds of things.
Are you involved at all with the monetization part of Riot? Because I know not at all.
No.
Would you feel comfortable talking about it, a little bit about it?
That's now probably not. I can, if you ask me questions, it's probably very much from a gamer standpoint.
Okay, well that works. So how about this? Like, we know, Victor knows, I know that there's a lot of talk about monetization, right? Microtransactions, especially with EA and what's happening with Battlefront, and way before that, right? It's been going on for years and years and years. And every time it seems like a big publisher announces a new plan, whether it's Ubisoft or whoever, there's always a tremendous amount of backlash from the gamers. But not with Riot. Not with Riot. Why is it that in your games, in Riot, why is it accepted? Is there a secret formula that other publishers or companies can steal? Or like, what is going on? Why are you guys successful in this?
I mean, everybody can experience the game and basically look at the way it's being presented to them. If we're talking fair to the player base, or if they feel cheated or anything, I think strongly. You basically have like a lot of feedback tools where we basically instantly get messaged when players basically tell us that we fucked something up.
Really?
Like if like if something happens on Reddit, for example, in North America, you can be very, very sure that my brand manager will be standing at my desk, or my direct report will be standing at my desk. It's like, okay, what did we do wrong? Like, how can we make this better? It's one of the core metrics that we use in determining how successful we are in talking to players from a publishing perspective. So even though we don't, we're not directly in charge of that aspect from the business side of things, we are hopefully we are as close as possible to the pulse of what gamers feel about how we treat them, how much they are enjoying a certain product. There's been numerous cases, for example, where we felt like, we felt like this skin is good enough. We don't want to withhold that from players. We released it, and then players told us, actually, this is not good enough. I thought Riot would do better on this one, and then we took it back, and then we made it better, and then we released it again. It's hopefully that type of relationship and building that type of trust over the years that hopefully tells.
And it goes right back to making gamers care, right? It goes right back into your mission statement.
Yeah, but it's also, everybody that is being hired at this company is a gamer himself. Like, we only have people who actually definitively know what it feels like to go through what, many gamers are complaining about when, they play a certain product or they feel cheated or anything. We absolutely know that because, for example, me personally, I was really looking forward to Battlefront 2, and then because of the controversy, I decided, okay, this is actually a title I'm going to skip. I played Battlefield 1 for a while. I really enjoyed it. I was looking forward to Battlefront 2. Like, the first game for me didn't really deliver enough content that I felt compelled to purchase, but for the second game, I was really looking forward to it. And then, this kind of controversy really also, me as a gamer, kind of, I felt like, this doesn't, this just just doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem like I'm being treated fairly. So hopefully having that empathy, I mean, it won't prevent company from ever fucking something up, but hopefully for the large majority, people feel like that they're getting value for whatever time or money that they put into a product.
Mm-hmm. I feel like League of Legends is successful in terms of the monetization because it's free to play. So that kind of attracts the gamer to join in on that game in the first place. And essentially you kind of get, like the champions, for example, you get a certain amount for free, I assume.
Yeah.
I played it in the past, but I not enough to remember. And really it's up to the gamer if they want to, purchase another champion or whatever else it is that you can buy through that game. So I think League of Legends kind of does it in a good way in terms of that, because it's free to play, and then you could purchase if you so desire.
Yeah, for me, it's always like it's a much better conversation if players already love a character, and then you're just like, okay, I'm gonna purchase this thing now because it makes me look slightly cooler, but it doesn't give you any like advantage in game or something. The only thing that gives you advantage in game is actually getting better, and for these people who are spending hundreds and hundreds of hours sometimes on just like one character, really learning the intricacy of his abilities and his kit essentially. And it's kind of like if you're that into your hobby, let's say, if you play tennis all the time, you just might want to look cool while doing it. I played basketball in my youth, and like a huge deal for me was always like, these like wristbands on the arm didn't really help my game, but it kind of made me look a little bit more sincere. And I was gladly spending money on that because I felt like, I'm gonna look so much cooler than this other kid on this concrete, basketball course.
Well, I think the wristband adds weight to your hand, which allows you to shoot from a further distance.
Oh my god!
That's what I actually told myself at the time. But if you're really honest to yourself, it's the same with shoes to some extent. I guess there's some differences there, but then at the end of the day, it's your skill that decides on how good you look doing something. And if you really fall in love with a character, if you really feel like, hey, today I feel like this fun, pool party skin or something, that's great. But if you don't, I actually got a couple of friends playing into the game who so far, didn't spend anything, and they have a great time. So that's always good to hear.
So it seems like maybe your attitude has changed towards the game of League of Legends, and now that you appreciate it and actually play it now?
Oh yeah. Like by the time I got hired, I was heavily invested in League. I claim that I'm actually any good at it. I'm like medium silver, which I think technically puts me like right at the 50% margin of like all the players out there. I'm like right in the middle in terms of skill set. But yeah, I will try and get to gold next season, which is starting soon. So there's
I'm scared of that game just because of the intensity of other players that you come across. I mean, they're just so good, so heavily invested. They know their champion like the back of their hand, that they can whoop you from it seems like a great distance almost.
The matchmaking is super sophisticated. So usually if you're starting out new, you play a couple of bot matches, and what I always recommend is basically teaming up with somebody who already plays the game and kind of can give you a couple of pointers here and there. But for the large portion of it, you don't need to be too scared, because on the other side, if you're actually playing PvP, there's like algorithms that basically put like equal amount of skill on each side, so that it should almost like you actually have a chance of winning. And I've been in those matches where you just get stomped. that still happens, but for the large majority, there's the game has been has been modified over the years so heavily. It's so intricate. There's so many ways to basically, kills isn't like the only way to win the match. Like sometimes you actually can get like half of the kills of the enemy team, and still, if you play the objectives, you can still win the game. If you're not down on your last tower or something, but you like turtle inside your base and you hold the fort just for a little bit longer, and then you have hit like a crazy wombo combo and you wipe the enemy team, and then you actually march in their base and basically completely turn the game around. I don't know, it's probably kind of comparable to football. Sometimes then teams fumble and something crazy happens and it puts the whole aspect of the game upside down in the matter of seconds. And League is kind of like that, in the sense that you should always feel empowered to basically, okay, this is, the last 10 minutes I was really, really bad. I made a lot of mistakes, but if I focus right now, there's so many ways on how I can, make the way for my team to basically coming back into the game.
That's a really good analogy. The football, that is a really good analogy. And in games like that, I think, especially the multiplayer ones, they're the ones that I feel like they do really well. It's like almost a hidden formula, right? Where no matter how, like, assuming both teams are pretty evenly matched, right? Like you're always, you're never too far off, but you always know that you're only one mistake away from losing your title. And that kind of tug of war, right, is what kind of that balance, I think, really sells a lot of games. Like, and same thing with Battlefield, I feel like. And actually, can I circle back for 1 second? You mentioned that
go for it, sorry.
You liked Battlefield 1. Did you play?
Yes, I do, yeah.
What about Battlefield 4 and 3? Did you play those as well?
So Battlefield 3, I played the beta, like that metro map. I probably put in, I don't know, like 80 hours just into that beta.
Jeez.
Just into that map.
Wow.
Is there 80 hours in a 3-day beta?
I was, yeah. Then that's probably then unrealistic. I remember I basically played that straight. I think. Oh yeah, I also played it on console and on PC, because I think those betas were slightly shifted around the time. And actually purchased the game both for PC and console, because I have friends playing kind of like on both platforms, and I try to be competitive in both. But yeah, I I played Battlefield Vietnam with my brother, and putting on the soundtrack in the helicopter and playing multiplayer matches that way. That was amazing. So I was always like keen on all the stuff that DICE put out, and Battlefield 3 probably was my personal high moment. I remember the first trailers that they put out with the squad making their way through this building, and just seeing the impact of that rocket launcher, and it's just like I was blown away by the quality of it. And it's just like, okay, this is insane. The way they remixed the Battlefield theme during those logos in the end of those trailers, I was just so hyped for that game.
The music theme?
So I played, when.
I love that.
So they had the classic Battlefield theme, but for Battlefield 3 they gave it like this cool remix, more untouched, and it's just like it spoke to me. It was such a cool way to basically get me hyped to bring that setting into the modern times. And then the beta was absolutely phenomenal. I guess from a gameplay perspective, it's like two forces like smashing constantly into each other. That's kind of how Metro was designed, I guess. But for me, I just like that was the most fun I probably had with Battlefield. I also played Battlefield 4 when it came out, but I was just working too much at the time, so I never get fully into it. I recently just talked to a couple of people who were saying, like, after 3 years, like, DICE still like really, really supported the content, and that's why the community is actually now more alive than ever in that game, which is funny now that Battlefield 1 is out. But yeah, I basically I also played Battlefield 1 probably the same amount of time as I played Battlefield 4, but I didn't reach like whatever the level cap is, like 60 or something, like not even once. I think I made it to like level 30 or something.
Just from your tone, I feel like you, me, and Victor are on the same page here, where I can safely say that Battlefield 1 was not quite as, I don't know, either it didn't quite speak to us as much, or it wasn't as fun to us as it was for 3 and 4. I mean, maybe not 4 for you because you couldn't play it much, but I felt like 3 was the high point. 4 was phenomenal as well. Battlefield 1, I don't know what it was exactly there, but I feel like it lost something.
I guess I was applauding them for the choice of the setting. I think that was super, super bold, and for me as for example, I was always like a big fan of the Assassin's Creed franchise, like specifically 2, and when you got to hang out with Leonardo da Vinci as a European, oh my god, like so great. But then when they kept releasing these things, I was like, this is like too much of a good thing. I want just take your time, do something different. So when Battlefield 1 actually came boldly out with a statement like that, this setting, and put like full force behind it, I just wanted that game to succeed. And I think the actual gameplay was just maybe a little bit too, like, not quite tactical enough. So there's also something funky with how the horses work and that kind of stuff. It's a little bit too, it sometimes feels a little bit too random. So something with with Battlefield 3 and that metro map, it was kind of like you kind of always knew where the enemies were and they kind of knew where you were, so it felt almost like a fair standoff kind of game, and it's like a lot of back and forth. And then in Battlefield 3 I always feel like it's just like a crazy rush, which is still it's exhilarating and it's cool, and it it sounds great on like a great sound system.
Oh yeah.
But it still feels like on Battlefield 3 I played on PC because I want to sit down, I want to coordinate with my squad, I want to press Q to spot the enemy, and on console I don't really feel the same level of being engaged. It feels like a much more a slightly more casual experience, but that might only be by my personal feeling.
So if you had to pick, let's say consoles only, and it's only because like our whole podcast is centered around Victor picking the PlayStation, which is obviously the wrong choice, and me picking the Xbox, which is the better choice. Which, if you had to pick one on the spot right now, what do you go with, Xbox or PlayStation? Please say Xbox.
So I'm gonna avoid the answer by saying, wait a second, by saying I never owned a Nintendo console.
You never owned a Nintendo console?
Yeah, I hated the Wii. So there's I think there's 3 major predictions that I horribly got wrong. At first I thought Twitter's stupid. Why would you only have 140 characters? Nobody's going to ever use this. And the second thing was the Wii. People look so stupid doing that. This will never be successful. So while the rest of the world basically progressed, I'm still in the same camp of the Nintendo Wii's for kids. I never really was involved with Mario games and that kind of stuff. I actually owned the original Xbox first in Germany, and then I owned the Xbox 360, and then I got the PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, Xbox One X. I don't have a PS4 Pro, I think.
Fantastic. So it sounds like you made up your answer.
I've basically been an Xbox head first.
There we go.
If that matters.
That makes all the difference.
I think these days it doesn't matter anymore, but there was a period of time, I think specifically during the Xbox 360 years, that I actually enjoyed just like multiplayer games on the Xbox more. I remember like countless of hours, playing with friends over the headset, like Call of Duty and that kind of stuff. And the interface just was a little bit more, I don't know, snappier or just like easier to get into. But yeah, then, Uncharted and all those great games on the PlayStation eventually forced me to buy everything to some extent. Yeah.
Are you ever gonna get a Nintendo Switch?
So that's the thing. It's like no. Like
you're just being stubborn.
Zelda's probably the best game of all time that I will never play. Like I'm completely missing out on probably 50% of the greatest games of all time. But watched the Games Awards yesterday, and I was like, it's going to be Zelda, and obviously, it has to be Zelda, and I would applaud that game, and I would, actually recommended the game to a lot of people without ever having played it, because I know it's amazing, and I know those guys are doing amazing work. The game just, it's just not appealing to me personally. There's something about the controller that just doesn't, I don't know.
Oh yeah, it
doesn't speak to me.
Yeah.
The PlayStation pad, by the way, is inferior to the Xbox pad.
Inferior. Thank you.
Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. I could go on for days.
Inferior?
Absolutely, in every way.
Do you remember on the original Xbox they had the large round pads, the ones that were terrible, but then they came out with the original Japanese pads for the original Xbox, and I think they called it like S-pads or something.
Yeah.
And those were the cooler form factor, the smaller stuff, and this is now the form factor that they basically kept for the last 10 years or so. But that original form factor essentially was like with the analog sticks
offset.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think it's because of those super early years that kind of like feeling just resonates with me more.
Thank you.
Friends who are saying exactly the opposite, so don't feel bad about it.
We're not gonna interview those friends. So as we close, there's two things I want to ask. One,
sure.
If there is a kid out there who's in college now, or maybe he's in high school, and he wants nothing more than to find a way into the game industry, is there a actionable piece of advice you can give him? Something that he can actually start doing now, and you can't say work hard or build a great demo reel or anything like that, and nothing general, like a specific piece of advice that he could start doing right now. What would that be?
Okay, the first two things would be work hard and build a great demo reel. If you wanna have something after that, I would actually argue, because for me the entryway was actually following the games industry. Like still to this day, I have like, that's why I'm talking to you guys. I have just like so much fun and enjoy just talking about the industry as a whole. If you're really passionate, let's say you're a 2D concept artist for like characters, follow those artists that you really, really admire. Get like updated on the techniques that they're using, what kind of brushes they're using, what kind of programs they're using, how long it took them to do something, and then try and match that. If you're really, really interested in art styles, or if you feel like, hey, there's in 10 years there's like a good art director in myself, really try and observe if when you start actually playing those games, don't just play them as a being entertained by a piece of media. Just try and analyze them, like the choices that level designer made, the choice that that one texture artist made. One of the greatest things for me is, for example, right now playing Uncharted, I probably take twice as long as those games should take me, because it's just I go into the engine, and then there's like a marketplace or something, and I just walk around that marketplace for like 10 minutes and look at all the crazy detail that these people put on there, and it's just like it blows my mind. There's the same thing when I studied film, you basically are being taught to not just consume movies but actually watch them, and I think that's just more like a mindset that you can start to develop, rather than you don't necessarily right out of the get-go have to be perfect at everything, but just you can slowly, really over the years, you can train your eye basically maybe to start noticing things. And for me, for example, I was never good at anything 100%. I couldn't really script. I couldn't really level design. I kind of could edit, but only a little bit. I know a little bit about audio, but not like fully. I was never an actor. I was never a character artist. I was never a game designer, but I knew enough about all these different disciplines. So when there's now, a job where I basically kind of have to use, or I have to know all those things a little bit, and hopefully combine them in a smart and an interesting way, that's like a skill set that you don't necessarily can learn at a particular school, or I'm just going to take this 20-hour course and then I'm good. It's more like a mindset that you can like constantly shape. And I think the other big tip I would have, it's probably gotten better the last 5 years, but working in the games industry is still one of the most terrifying and especially in entry positions, one of the more unrewarding jobs that you can have, especially if you have like a good degree or anything. You're being like sometimes pushed into this huge machinery, and that can feel very, very intimidating and very, very unrewarding. It's super, super important to keep checking yourself if you really, really have the love for that format, for that form of like interactive storytelling. Because if you don't, you're going to get burned out so fast, and you're going to wish you had made different choices. And that is always terrible when you're growing up and, you're not really sure about, the life choices that you're making or that you made. So if you really like, once a week or like once every month or something, you sit down and you just play like a new game and you really feel like, does this like get you? Is that something that still, gets that kid inside of you getting excited about games again? And as long as you have that, I think you will be surprised to how much more you can endure, and then to eventually get those chances that you deserve if you hone your skills. If you basically do 1 and 2, essentially.
That's really good. And I think
that's a lot of good information. Always keeping up with relevant technology, I think, is important, and techniques and technology in the industry.
I mean, whatever you do, there's chances that there's somebody doing it better. So there's always something to learn from. Right now in my company, I also host creative shares where we just look at stuff from the industry. It's mostly games, but sometimes, I bring, look at this cool teaser for the show Westworld, like this cool ARG interactive website kind of experience. Like, I don't see anybody else doing something like this right now. We basically, I basically show a couple of pieces of media and, go ask around the room, and people can ask questions, but also can just, can voice opinions. Like, does it get you? Like, why do you feel like they made a certain choice? And, what would you have done differently? Is there something, that we can learn from this? Is there something that we would have done better or anything like that, really? And it's important to, even if you work in that type of space, it's very, very easy to basically get home and be like, fuck games. I don't want to see them for the rest of the day. But usually the moment when you are, when you're relaxed, when you're like open to new impulses, to new influences, which, isn't necessarily always at your desk. That's then really when sometimes you get like the greatest ideas. So staying open for that kind of stuff, I guess, is important.
Okay.
Excellent.
Man, so I wish we had more time. We already blew past an hour, I think, and there's still some people.
I already ate, so I'm safe. But
well, we promised. So made a promise to ourselves that we're going to try to keep every episode to at least an hour, because we've gotten some feedback that over an hour episodes are not as welcome as those that are under an hour long.
When it shows up on like a podcast in iTunes or something, you want to hit for that 55 or something, that it just looks nice. It just looks less intimidating.
Absolutely.
It's good user experience.
So with that, I would love to thank you for being on here, and I hope that one day we can have you back on again, maybe talk about where you are and at that point in life, and ask you the rest of the questions.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Let me know when you guys are in LA, and then I can show you the right premises and can give you a fun tour or something.
That'd be fantastic.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
We should make a trip to LA then. Here we go.
Yeah. All right. Thanks so much, Anton. It was a pleasure having you here.